I tell you what, I am licking my lips in anticipation in getting, in getting involved in, another busy period, because it really is. And as you know, and as I'm sure everybody that's in the industry knows, we don't wait for it to be quiet. We wait for it to be busy and get busy and do more good stuff that people walk away from, and then they come back and they go, remember we had that really good time with you, we're back to experience it again, and which is the heart and soul of the industry.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. COVID-19 took the world by surprise, but it's made all of us rethink what we do. It's made governments consider different forms of legislation, and it's allowed consumers to engage on a different level with the food industry. In some countries, that change is having a huge impact on the restaurant industry. Emmanuel Benardos is the General Manager of Food and Beverages at Fairmont, Singapore, and the Swisshotel the Stamford in Singapore. Emmanuel, how are you going?
Good, mate. How are you?
Good. You've been in Singapore 9 years now, and you're a real part of that food industry there. It's been a year for COVID in Singapore. It's really sort of kicked off quite early there. What sort of changes have you experienced over the last year in life in Singapore?
It was a really sort of funny time just over a year ago now. Actually, a year and a month ago since we started getting affected. It was Lunar New Year in 2020. I remember it, the 28th and 29th of January. And we actually had a number of guests from mainland China who were coming and joining us. And within about a 3 or 4 day period, there was a huge sort of number of concerns that were coming through from mainland China to Singapore about this new disease that we knew very, very little about, but all the news was sort of pretty terrifying. We actually had a number of guests and groups joining us from Wuhan at the time, which was quite sort of nerve-wracking, and a lot of mainland Chinese do venture out, and from what I understand, do leave now for a little bit of a vacation, and a lot of them found themselves in this part of the world, in Southeast Asia, and obviously in downtown Singapore, where this hotel and food and beverage complex is.
You've experienced different sorts of lockdowns over the last year, and it's had an impact on all the operations that you do. What is the state of play at the moment there?
Well, look, just to give you a little bit of a feel as to the sort of complex that this is a hotel of 2 separate towers, obviously 2 separate brands, and also a large convention centre. In the convention centre, it's about 10,000 square metres of space. There's a little over 2,000 hotel rooms. There are 32 kitchens. There are 15 food and beverage outlets, all separate P&Ls. And then I've got an external catering business that I look after, where we look after everything from single events to catering, very much like any one of the big catering companies that are sort of domestic or global, and then a whole range of other R&D that we do within the complex at any one given time. So there's a lot going on, and with that going on, there's a lot of monitoring that we need to do, not just back of house with cleanliness and what the core standards are, but also what the Singapore standards are. What's going on up here is has made running food and beverage business, which isn't traditionally a high stakes game, which is sort of, whilst it's a lot of fun, and people sort of walk into a restaurant on a Friday or a Saturday night, as you very well know. When they walk into a restaurant on a Friday or a Saturday night, they're like, wow, what an incredible business you've got. And then sort of what's ticking over in your mind is, well, yeah, but you should be here on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Whoa, crisis. So and I suppose I should also frame for everybody, Anthony, obviously you and I have been friends for a long time, which is why sort of this discussion also is that much easier for you and I to have at this point, because, you understand the industry, and obviously you understand sort of the different things that go on and the nuances that are going on. So it's super easy to talk to you about this sort of stuff. And may I also say that I've been a very, very big fan of everybody else that's been on the show as well, mate. But there have been different stages for us. So front of house, when we first reopened in about sort of June, July, we were only allowed to have 5 people per booking, and you couldn't be cheeky and try to book sort of a 5 and a 5 next to each other. They had to be 2 separate bookings, and they couldn't be in the same venue. So let's say there were 10 of us, 10 mates that wanted to go out. We couldn't legally go and sit in the same venue as each other. We had to go and sit in separate restaurants as groups of 5. So, and we had people trying to game the system, because they were just going out for a good time. They didn't want to be stuck in their houses or be eating takeaway from their favourite restaurant. And they just wanted to be experienced getting out and getting in amongst it again. Also, there is social distancing between tables, a metre. And then on top of that, we've got to get all booze off the table by 10:30. It doesn't mean you don't have to stop serving them food or soft drinks, but the applicability of being able to, or the sort of more correctly, the availability to make sort of revenue off tables sort of diminishes incredibly after that point.
You mentioned that you look after there's multiple kitchens, multiple restaurant offerings and food and beverage offerings. Have they been impacted differently because they're offering different things? The impact has been sort of generally sort of mimicked across all of the outlets. We're a small place. Just to give everybody a bit of a sort of frame of reference of Singapore. Singapore is 728 square kilometres. Australia is about 7.7 million square kilometres, and there's about sort of a 10,500 times difference between the size. So Singapore fits into Australia about 10,600 times, and there's a population difference, a significant population difference as well. And not only that, but we also don't have any tourists that are now coming in from, there's no sort of far side city, or there's no sort of satellite cities. There's downtown Singapore, and that's it. So you can't sort of really travel to go and experience something else out in Newcastle, or in, if you're in sort of Melbourne, you can't drive to Bendigo, or if you can't sort of go for a drive around anywhere. So we're really lacking in any more than the current population of what is effectively equivalent to the size of Sydney, which is about 5.5 million people. So everybody has almost effectively felt the same thing. Has there been new opportunities with government legislation that's come in, and as you've had to adapt and ensure the business's viability, has there been new opportunities emerge?
Yeah, look, the opportunities that have emerged has actually been just to look at things like, as ridiculous as it sounds, like everything that everybody's been doing back home in Australia, been doing takeaway, and also selling things like produce as well. Laws up here are a little bit trickier, but one thing that's easier than back home is liquor laws. And I've been doing a lot of sales of alcohol. The sweet spot sits at about sort of 30 to 40 Sing dollars. Now, Sing dollars and Aussie dollars are about the same, sort of about on par most of the time. I sort of have trying to, obviously being in a 5-star hotel, you don't want to be, putting on something that is at the sort of at the lower end. Even though whilst it's affordable, instead what I've been doing is super affordable things like champagne. And in Singapore, to be able to buy a $55 bottle of champagne inside a hotel and be able to take it home with you is absolutely incredible. And sort of we blew out of the water, and it was a big talking point up here that that Emmanuel and the Fairmont and Prego, which is the restaurant that I sell it out of, and my online platform was selling $55 bottles of champagne. Which is super affordable. Even in Australia, that's super affordable. But there are other people around town that were doing other similar things with red and white wine. And the restaurants that are in not such a metropolitan area like I am, were seeing huge increases in food takeaway. We not so much so, which that was one surprise to me, that takeaway wasn't a big thing, but it sort of makes sense, right? Who's going to come into the city and get takeaway food? But it was happening much more with the restaurants that are on those sort of peripheral area in between the city and in inverted commas, the burbs.
What's the general feeling at the moment for yourself and for the citizens of Singapore? Do you feel like that you're getting towards the other side of it, or does it feel normal the situation is at the moment? Can you give us a glimpse of what the sense is at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So I'm sitting in downtown Singapore in my office overlooking Raffles Hotel, and the road noise is tremendously quiet to what it usually is. The sort of the general traffic noise is super low. I walk through the lobbies of the hotels; they're super quiet. Everything is very, very, very is unbelievably quiet in Singapore. Retail is quiet, restaurants are quiet. Obviously, bars are not going to see any business because you got to stop drinking at 10:30. So do we feel that there's some sense of normality coming back? Yes. It's mandatory that you wear a mask in public here. If you're on the bus, you can't, or on the train, they call it the MRT up here, or if you're in a taxi, you're not really supposed to talk on a phone or talk to each other. We've got some sort of little quirky things that are clearly obviously different to back home. We started getting the vaccination shots about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I got my second shot on Sunday, and because I'm considered a frontline worker because of the potential exposure to foreign guests, and great to get it. And there's been a lot of a lot of very sort of positive rhetoric about that. The World Economic Forum is coming to Singapore. Should be here in sort of August-ish.
Wow.
Which is massive because it's usually obviously in Davos. And for them to reroute it, for it to be rerouted back to Singapore is huge. So there are some sort of positive things that we're starting to see. But anything absolutely solid, not just yet. Everybody's talking very positively about F1 coming back to Singapore. And apparently that's slated to be in October. And I tell you what, I am licking my lips in anticipation in getting, in getting involved in, another busy period, because it really is. And as you know, and as I'm sure everybody that's in the industry knows, we don't wait for it to be quiet. We wait for it to be busy and get busy and do more good stuff that people walk away from. And then they come back and they go, remember we had that really good time with you. We're back to experience it again, and which is the heart and soul of the industry.
There's been a real fascinating link between Australia and Singapore over the last 10 or 15 years, with a lot of expats opening restaurants there, and the likes of yourself going over there a decade ago. Why do you think that is? And give us a sense of what that sort of impact has been like of international influence, such as professionals from Australia.
Yeah, look, it's really funny. I speak to guys like Dave Pint. So Dave's, one of my closest mates. And I know that, I remember. I think it was at, where was it? It was in Sydney, and I introduced you to when he sort of flew in. I think he was in Sydney for about 3 or 4 hours. I picked him up, and we bumped into you at me and him bumped into each other at Young Henry's. One sort of Monday or Tuesday afternoon, obviously after 5 o'clock, because you would have been hard at work. But it's incredible to see the level of professionalism of the Aussie talent up here. The international talent, yeah, sure, and there's a lot of people from everywhere else. But the hard hitting Aussies that are up here, and the interest and investment going from Australia, into Singapore. My former boss, Locke Peng, owns the Old Clare in Sydney, with another notable Singaporean, Dr. Stanley Kwek, and they own that entire precinct. On top of that, Accor, the current company I work for, an incredible business, is the biggest is the biggest hotelier in Australia. But then accordingly, this region is from what I believe, the fastest growing region in the world for this company. And you go to the head office of Accor, and there are more Aussies than anything else. And you hear Australian accents, in the Accor sort of hub office for Southeast Asia, like all the time. And it's wonderful to see those very visible Aussies, that are in venue. But it's also incredible to see these other Aussies that are doing really big things in big regional roles in hospitality up here as well. Can I explain why? Mate, I can't explain why. I think it was, almost pure luck that I ended up in Singapore, because, I remember when we were kids, in the 90s, everybody was either going to London or Hong Kong. Do you remember that?
Mm.
And then it shifted a bit to China for a while. And then all of a sudden everybody was going to Scandinavia, and then quite literally out of nowhere, Singapore popped up on the radar. And then the entire region really started bubbling up, places like Vietnam, and also Thailand as well.
You made the move to Singapore in 2012, and we can talk about what you've done there with some pretty amazing operators in that time shortly. But you're a 4th generation hospitality worker with a rich history throughout your family. Tell us about a bit about that and how you moved into the industry.
Yeah, sure. Mum. So my ethnic background is Greek. Obviously, I don't look the way I sound, quite obviously. It's clearly false advertising. But my family started moving to Australia in the late 1800s, and moved as a majority to rural New South Wales and to the Central West. And then my grandfather in 1925 opened up a little Greek cafe in a very small town in New South Wales called Moss Vale. And that's 96 years old, and it's being run by one of my younger brothers, Dani, spelled Ioanis, so pronounced Ioannis, if you ever get there. And please remind him of that when you do drop in for a burger and a shake. So that was on Dad's side. Mum's side were Greeks from Turkey, and so their two cooking styles very sort of funny, is very, very different, even though they're cooking the same dishes. And the story goes that one grandma presented the other grandma one day a box of baklava, and the other grandma looked mortified, saying, "Greeks don't cook this, do they?" And it's just a wonderful expression about how different food is within a single culture, but then also how mixed that culture is within Australia, and how rich the culture is the food culture is in Australia, and it's only getting better and better. So I've sort of got into the industry because I love people, culture, food, booze, alcoholic and non-alcoholic, and I've been sort of all around. Probably most notably, I spent many years at the Grand National in Paddington, which is, I think, where we may have bumped into each other first, and that was about at least 10 kilos ago, in the early 2000s. And that's where I sort of really cut my teeth understanding sort of how the food and beverage industry works, and befriending, like real just like captains of the industry, guys like Peter Sullivan, and Tony Bilson, and and all of these people that at the time were these just sort of epic heroes and spokespeople of the industry, and now when they come. When any of these sort of big, heavy-hitting people come up to Australia, come from Australia up to Singapore, it's great to reconnect with them and chat as equals, and to talk about the industry. And it's sort of really something, because you sort of pinch yourself and go, wow, I aspired, for you to look in my general direction at an awards ceremony, but now you sit down and have a beer and have a laugh with them as equals, which is a really nice part of what it is that we do.
Gastropubs have become a real part of the culinary landscape in Australia, but the Grand National was sort of the beginnings of that. Can you take us back to what it was like at that time? You guys got a hat, and it was a real sort of a secret location, but really well celebrated.
Yeah, mate. It was a funny story. So I moved to Dubai with Ritz Carlton, sort of in the 2000s, and I remember getting the call and my boss at the time saying, an incredible hotelier called Octavio Gamara, and I was working at the Ritz Carlton in Sydney, and the Ritz Carlton in Sydney was being closed down, and he said, mate, you're off to Dubai, and I went, oh great, Dubai, that's awesome, and I hung up the phone, I turned to Dad and I went, where's Dubai? So after about a year in Dubai, I got back to Sydney, and Dubai was a very different place as what it is now. I got back to Sydney, and I was just super keen to work and sort of get ahead and learn as much as I could, so I could, sort of get into that management, into those management positions, where I could see that because I really love the industry and I just wanted to learn as much as I could. So during the day, I had a full-time job at the Four Seasons in Sydney in the early 2000s, and then 2 to 3 nights a week or 4 nights a week, I'd go and work at the Grand National as a waiter, as a section waiter. So here I was, assistant chief concierge of the Four Seasons in Sydney during the day. Had a huge team, massive team, booking tickets and booking restaurants. And then at night, here I was, a section waiter. In fact, I started as a food runner, and just sort of running food and polishing cutlery and just doing that. And so I was working just like an absolute sort of Trojan at the time, and just really enjoying it and enjoying the industry. There was an incredible young chef, female chef there, called Samantha Joel, who was running the kitchen at the time. And she's, still kicking around with an incredible catering business based out of Leichhardt, on Parramatta Road. And I just remember just this incredible almost club feel. It felt like this little private club, and we welcomed everybody, with great food, great service, really quirky little wine list, a few internationals, and that was at the time when, we were selling bottles of wine in restaurants, at a whisker under $40, and people weren't that surprised. I understand Australia's changed a bit now, and you can't get away with sort of doing that and having a viable business, but never mind. Like always the old timers say, it wasn't like that. It wasn't that expensive in my day. But yeah, so mate, it was a great little pub, and and then Colin Fassnage again, a really good mate of ours. He moved in down the street from Le Grand Bouffe over in. Do you remember that when he moved in from Roselle? And then there was the Three Weeds over in Roselle as well, and Bistro Moncur around the corner. So there were like 3 or 4 like really solid pubs that were doing like really good food at the time. In the mid 2000s, and we happened to be one of them. Yeah, and it was funny. I look back at the mistakes I made now and laugh, just because I just think to myself, how why did I do that for? Like most, I think, honest professionals. But it was a great time, and and we ended up, I think, with 4 consecutive years of a hat, and some great mentions in the Good Food Guide, and and the guy who was on the pans was a bloke called Ian Oakes, a really solid chef. Who's now got a cafe come restaurant down at Bondi, and doing wonderful, and still doing great food, really great, honest food.
You mentioned you're not sure why there's such a strong connection between Australian professionals and Singapore, but you were lured yourself in 2012. Can you tell us about what drew you to go there and sort of the influence that you've had there since?
Yeah, sure. It was a very sort of entertaining opportunity that was proposed to me to come and run a microbrewery, with a sort of modern Australian slant. There was an Englishman in the kitchen who had spent a lot of time in Melbourne, and they were really trying to go for that very sort of friendly, approachable, yet upmarket type dining experience, with really great booze. And it's still there to this day, and it's called Level 33. And it looks out over Marina Bay and Marina Bay Sands. I sort of, from quite a few of the restaurants that I look after here, I can sort of still see it. And I do go there for the occasional sort of frosty beverage. Yeah. So look, mate, I only expected to be up here for 2 years, and then sort of come back home and sort of see what was next. But the way that I saw that the industry grow in the first year that I was up here was just, it was changing at a meteoric rate. And I remember, hearing about, these incredible restaurants with these incredible concepts, and Aussies coming over, and, finding out about, the amazing Waku Gin that was opened at Marina Bay Sands by Tetsuya Wakeda, another highly impressive restaurant with the ever amazing Tets. Can that guy ever do anything wrong? He never does anything wrong. He's just like, and there were people coming through here all the time. And there was also talk of World's 50 Best coming here just as I had landed, and it really started becoming a culinary hub, and I just sort of happened to sort of trip into Singapore at the time when all of this big wave of stuff was happening, and there was less of a concentration on Hong Kong being the hub and more about Singapore. And then sort of in that 3 to 4 years that I first got here, Singapore absolutely exploded. The Michelin Guide coming here, Asia's 50 Best, World's 50 Best, was then coming to this side of the world, and dare I say, and as much of a cliche as it is, the rest is history.
Well, you worked with Dave Pint and with Burnt Ends and all of the different things that they've done, and now you are running a huge operation. But one of the restaurants under your banner has Kirk Westaway as the chef, and it's a Michelin star. It's in the top 50 of Asia's restaurants. What's it like, sort of dealing with restaurants that are at that level, and making sure that they're executed to that really highest possible offering?
Yeah, mate. Well, look, it's funny you bring that up. And I suppose that this is the lure, particularly for anybody that sort of wants to leave Australia, or I would have never have had the opportunity to run 1 or 2 Michelin starred restaurants, or restaurants in World's 50 Best, not just Asia's 50 Best. I remember when I was running Unlisted Collection, I was the only person in the world, and thanks obviously to Dave and Chef Andre Chang, I was the only person in the world running 2 restaurants in the world's top 100 for Unlisted Collection. You know what I mean? And so to get that experience, and then to understand how to then shift restaurants from having no stars to 1 star, or working with these incredible brands that are then sort of thrust into the Michelin Guide, sort of as it was introduced here, is an incredible experience. And to keep those restaurants at that level, you've got to be pushing yourself and your team, but you've got to be pushing yourself more every single day. You almost can't have an off. Like, you can't have a day where you're like, oh yeah, well, wasted that day. And if you do, you're at a critical point of not doing the right thing, not just by yourself, but by the team you work with. And we look at things, at a micro level all of the time, whether it be the plates, the cutlery, the music, the level of the music, the carpet. We go through and we check that every light globe is working. We check that every piece of crockery, doesn't have a chip in it, that they're all looking impressive. And, and this is before we even worry about the wine list or the food being put on the plate. You know what I mean? And even though I may have, like 600 odd colleagues that I work with in food and beverage, it's important that I know each one of them by name, know what motivates them, know what frustrates them. And in a restaurant like John by Kirk Westaway, a different set of things that motivate and sort of, and keep people ticking over. And what you've got to do is you sort of got to work with them, and you've got to say, well, like, how do we make it better every day? And what tools do you need to do so?
You mentioned that you only expected to be away from Australia for 2 years, and yet you've been there 9 years now. With what's happened in the last year, are you missing Australia? And what's your thoughts? Do you see as Singapore as your home now?
Look, I'm a fairly sort of easygoing, bloke, like, or person. Very much like, all of sort of the contemporaries that we have in the industry, very much like yourself. Probably wouldn't say I'm as balanced as yourself. But, I'm sort of, just sort of bumbling along. Am I homesick for home? I'm homesick for seeing my brothers and my nephews and nieces and mum and dad, and sitting down and at the sort of, and having a bit of spinach pie and a yarn with mum. And I know mum will probably listen to this, so hi mum. Hopefully I'll see you soon. I haven't seen her in a year. And that bit, that's hard. But being away from home and not being able to leave is really very tricky. And this is not just me. This is any Aussie or most Aussies around the world that just, and we can't get home. And, I find myself looking at pictures of, around where I grew up, some, around Surrey Hills and Kensington, which is sort of the suburbs I grew up in, sort of downtown Sydney, or where my brothers live now in Moss Vale, which is where I spent a lot of my childhood, and I find myself flicking through pictures and looking at those pictures, because I can't get there. And here's the other thing, and I actually don't know when I'm going to be coming home next. It could be potentially another year or more. And that's a strikingly large dose of reality to sort of think about that. But I just keep myself busy and try not to focus too much on when I'm not going to be getting home, or just sort of you sort of throw yourself into things and keep yourself occupied, right?
There'll come a time when Singapore will take in a lot of tourists and things will get back on track. What's it like for someone going there the first time from a food sense? We know the international restaurants and the influence there, but what about some of the local eateries? Are there places you love to go?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Look, and what's great about Singapore is that you can find incredible places sort of right under your nose very, very easily. With all of the everything on the old internet machine that you can find, there's a whole lot of like really interesting stuff. And and if you feel like eating incredible pizza, there is incredible pizza everywhere around Singapore. If you feel like you want to have chili crab or great Indian or modern Indian, The place is a little bit littered with it, and it's super easy to find. The restaurants that I sort of tend to go to, if I'm not eating in my own restaurants, I tend to go to sort of down to Little India. There's a whole bunch of sort of incredible little restaurants down there. And compared to dining out in Australia, it's like super cheap as well. Rishi Nalendra, from who's a Sri Lankan-born Australian who's worked all over Sydney and Melbourne, has got Cloud Street here, but he's recently opened up an incredible little Sri Lankan place called, I'm going to mispronounce it because my Sri Lankan's not as good as it should be, called Kotawa, I believe it's pronounced. Probably not pronounced. It's, probably, with a mild sort of Sydney Greek accent on it. And he's got, this great little hip Sri Lankan place that's just opened up, about a 25-minute walk from where I'm sitting. Dave Pint has got Meat Smith with Little India, an American smokehouse with Indian flavors. If you walk down to sort of about 25 minutes in another direction, there's an incredible chef from Melbourne called Jason Jones. He's got a great little Mexican chain up here called Lucha Loco and Super Loco. And they're doing incredible Mexican food as well. So there's great stuff all over this city. And it's like really affordable and really great. And it's not all just, food of one band. It's like Sydney or Melbourne, you can, whatever you want to find here, you can find. And the hilarious thing is the majority of the produce, the majority of the booze, and in some cases, a lot of the sort of the senior talent in a lot of these venues are actually Aussies.
A lot of people have mentioned that, the last year has changed them quite a bit. And you said it earlier that you're a pretty easygoing guy, but has the last year sort of changed you and also changed your role within the company and in the industry?
Yeah, mate, it's actually been super, I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't expect to be sort of a 44-year-old man sort of working. I know, but I don't look it. I look incredible for 44, by the way, just so you know. I look sensational. Sort of for a short, fat bloke in a dark suit. I never expected to be sort of working 6-7 days a week, sort of 80, 90 hours a week, sort of and sort of doing whatever I had to do sort of to get by. You sort of expect yourself to, sort of be, not working so ferociously, sort of the older that you get. Or that was the image that I had in my mind. How wrong I was, yet another thing that I had, that I had no idea of, about what was potentially sort of in front of us. And I suppose, Ant, though, like, to be honest, like, I don't think I'm any different to anybody else out there. I think that there's a number of people in the industry that have worked, as hard, if not harder than me. I was looking at my pedometer on the old mobile telephone that I've got, and those things can record your steps, which I only recently found out about. The wonders of technology, and mate, and I was knocking off about 100 kilometres a week walking around the hotel. As everything from the morning maitre d' in the breakfast room, seating 300, 400, 500 guests for breakfast, then sort of getting on and doing my job, and then on weekends working as a banquet waiter, in this massive complex. And I suppose the thing is that if you don't have a high sort of level of humility and just sort of get the job done attitude in the industry at the moment, mate, you're cactus. The changes have been, if you don't roll your sleeves up and get stuck into it, you and your team are just, it's going to be even harder for you to survive in a time that even when people are working their absolute backsides off, you almost can't work enough. And as I said, I'm definitely not the only person in the industry. It's like my experience, and I know heaps of other people that were doing stints of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months at a time, 6, 7 days a week, 12 to 15 hours a day. And that's not just people up here that are doing that. I speak to a number of people back home really regularly. Guys like Nino Zakali or Jared Ingersoll or, like a whole bunch of our mates. And I speak to these guys, I try to speak to these guys as regularly as I can to just get a bit of a feeling as what's going on. Mate, 2 weeks ago, I was on the phone to Pete Sullivan as well, and just to get a sense of what they're doing, what their thoughts are, because you're trying to, it's been such a shift. You sort of think to yourself, wow, is it only me or is there other people experiencing this? And surely enough, you get on the phone to these people and they're having the same experience, right?
It's been a pretty whirlwind period of time. And as you say, it's a lot of people have had a shared experience as traumatic as it has been. What are you looking forward to most? You mentioned that there's the chance of the Grand Prix happening, but what are you looking forward to as we move forward?
Mate, I'm looking forward to sort of things freeing up, to get sort of more punters in the door so I can secure more people's jobs that I work with. Because at the moment, sort of the big strain for me is just making sure that everybody is working in an environment where they know that things are stable and that they're happy, and there's nothing worse than going into into a day where you sort of look at the reservations and you go, oh man, we're quiet again. I want to be, what I'm really looking forward to is those days when we can take as many bookings as we can. So the restaurant is full, so there is no social distancing, so we don't have to get the booze off the tables at whatever time it is, by 10:30. You know what I mean? When those restrictions are lifted, I still think it's too early to start talking about sort of, large numbers of people moving anywhere around the world. You know what I mean? I think it's, but mate, I'd just like to see more people being able to get into venues around Singapore. When the time is right, and when the Singapore government believes it's safe, I know they're going to do that. They've been doing exceptionally well. As I said, with the rollout of the vaccine and the way they're controlling it, it's the country that everybody's looking towards to see how well they're doing things. And it's a testament to their planning and forethought. But yeah, mate, I'm just looking back to normality, and being able to sit and have a beer myself at 10:33 in the evening, in the warm Singapore sort of evening breeze.
Well, mate, it's always good to catch up, and we've loved hearing the perspectives over there, and we'd love having you on Deep in the Weeds today. Please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. And by the way, just so you know, the audience up here for what it is you're doing is absolutely massive. So so thank you very much from the industry up here for the amazing the amazing content you're producing.
Thank you, mate. Talk soon.
All right, mate. Ta-da.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.